prevention training. And some training's already been mentioned here this morning, but this is one of those things that we want to make sure that we're constantly engaged in improving what we're doing, right? One of my favorite sayings is good enough is never good enough, right? It's like, let's make it better. How can we make it better? How can we improve? And I think if we get complacent and get to a place where we're good with status quo, that's when we start to take a nosedive, right? That's when things start to go south and things become ineffective. And so I think we should always be in a constant process of evaluation. How are we doing? And that's why we do the AARs, right? What went well? What didn't go well? What do we need to change? What do we need to fix? How can we improve? And so that's kind of what we want to talk about in relation to suicide prevention training. And a couple of quotes that I wanted to share with you. This is actually from a publication that was released from the White House not too long ago, the Biden administration. So it says, there are significant differences in risk of death by suicide among women and men, as well as by race ethnicity within the service member and veteran population in any given year. This evidence suggests that one-size-fits-all approaches will not be effective, and that's almost exactly what you said just a minute ago, right? And so, again, we don't want to just say, well, here's the Band-Aid, that should fix the broken leg, right? Does that make sense? No. Absolutely not. So we don't want to just have a one-size-fits-all approach. We want to constantly be evaluating, like, what's going to work best in this environment with this audience, with these specific risk factors or protective factors in play, or ethnic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, religious backgrounds. You know, we're all unique people, right? And so once again, that one-size-fits-all approach is not going to cut it. So the White House further states that organizations should be committed to continuous quality improvement. This will require increased investment by program leaders and stakeholder organizations in creating and sustaining a culture of program evaluation and continuous improvement within their suicide prevention programs. That pretty much spells it out, right? That's what we need to be engaged in continually. And then lastly, the CDC states that the effectiveness of suicide prevention programs will be strongly dependent on how well they are implemented. Practitioners in the field must be in the best position to assess the needs and strengths of their communities and to work with community members to make decisions about the combination of approaches that are best suited to their context. Again, customization, right? It's not the one-size-fits-all. And so that was a publication that was put out, again, by Centers for Disease Control. So the first question, before we dive into the first question, we have an additional panelist. I wanted her to have the opportunity to introduce herself, so go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lieutenant Jennifer Padilla. I'm a behavioral health officer, a licensed clinical social worker by trade, and a certified dialectical behavioral therapist. Very long acronyms, but all of that to say that I'm here to support the Department of Behavioral Health. I'm currently working out of a family advocacy program. You can always reach out to me. Maybe I'll share my contact information at the end. So if you have any questions, I'm here to support you. It really is an honor to wear this suit and be able to do what I can do.
Awesome. Appreciate that. And so, like all of our panelists, they all know what they're talking about. And so as you guys are thinking through your questions, writing some things down that we'll be able to answer after the third topic, we've assembled a great panel of experts in their field. They know their job very, very well, and they know the perspective that they represent very, very well. So let's go ahead and dive into the first question for this topic. So in your experience, how effective are the Army's current suicide prevention and intervention training efforts?
Can I?
Yeah.
Oh, they're terrible. and here's why. Because the Army spent millions of dollars on training like ACE and updating it, and extending out ACE-SI and getting to it. The problem is, and I'll give you an example here, since my collaboration with Ashley's team, we've probably, about 500, you think? We have certified 500 ACE-SI Tier 2 instructors. And I still have people coming up to me and can't define what ACE-SI is. And they're E5s, and it's not through their fault. It's because we're not invested in it. The only time we get invested in it is when it becomes a problem in our backyard. So I could do a show of hands right now and ask you, in all honesty, how many of you had the 90-minute ACE training, which is a universal training that we do every year and consistently for the last couple of years? One, maybe 2, 3 people. Again, it's the investment of the time and effort, and it's not. We're just so busy as an Army. We have so many things going on, but sometimes you gotta stop and you gotta smell what's going on and smell the roses, so to speak. And it's the same with the ACSI. We're great, and our efficacy is awesome as far as churning these people out. So as a result of the training not being done, or the perception that it's not done, it's not recorded, the CG tasked me, along with the R2 Performance Center, to churn out and certify another 240 instructors in the next 120 days. And then we're gonna have an installation-wide safety stand-down day, foundational readiness day, whatever. And we're going to try to tackle as many E5 through 03s across the installation. And how effective do you think that's gonna be? Minimal. So there's 11,633 E5s through 06s on this installation. The likeliness that we're even gonna put a dent in that bad boy in one day is next to none. The issue is, we gotta step up, we gotta do the training, then we can talk about the efficacy of it. If you don't do it, I'll give you an example and I swear I'm gonna shut up. The last ironclad I had a brigade commander and the team come in and go, well, we just had a suicide and we did ACSI training, so who's measuring the efficacy of the program? And I looked and I thought for a second, and I thought to myself, I'm not gonna bust this guy out, but did you do the ACSI training? And they didn't. Turned out that they did ACE training. So if we're not given the skill sets to these E5 through 03s, then we're not getting to the heart of the problem. We're terrible at it. And until we really pick it up, we're gonna continue to keep on. Now, is that the answer? Is it gonna fix every suicide? Absolutely not. The idea of prevention is to mitigate it as low as possible that you can do it. But they're always gonna happen regardless of what we do. But we're terrible on this installation and across the Army at nothing was trained.
I think from my experience, we have these tools that are not perfect by any means, and this is just my opinion as, Jen, not the Army's opinion. However, my experience has been we tend to utilize these resources, these tools, these programs almost as a reactionary measure versus a preventative measure, right? So what do I mean by that? If there's a loss within a unit, right, due to suicide, now let's make sure that everyone gets to meet, right, like all the chaplains, let's make sure that everyone gets to meet, the resources that are available. That is something that we should start from the get-go, right? You should know what resources are available to you from the beginning.
So within HSWEP, there's 5 pillars. I'm focused on the physical aspect. One of the things within the physical aspect of HSWEP is building facilitators, trained facilitators, that way they can lead PT, lead from the front. Our HHB, for instance, or in the battalion, we have 22 trained facilitators. How many of them step up every day? You don't have to answer the question because I know the answer. But what I picked up from what Mark said, the key thing is you have to step up. If no one's stepping up because they're on the sidelines, like when they come into the cough and during the strength training session, and all they do is work out and don't worry about pushing soldiers to do the right thing, are you stepping up or are you just hanging out on the sidelines? It's not always about you. Unfortunately, it's not always about you. You have to step up and make sure your soldiers are doing the right thing. In this instance, if you step up and you're doing the training, you're not being reactive, you're being proactive, just as LT said. You have to be proactive with it all, in every aspect, whether it's your job. Leading soldiers is your job. Whether you're a specialist, a PFC, a sergeant, or a young lieutenant, you have to step up. And if no one's stepping up, well, that's you. You're up next. Batter up.
Yeah, so I think for me, again, my opinion and just conversations that I've had with my husband is, yes, agreeing that things are very reactionary, but also recognizing that you can't, the way that the brain works, the way that people learn, you can't give individuals a one dose of education or a briefing and expect them to have developed a skill. And that's really what we're talking about with intervening, or that prevention piece of helping people when a concern or a stressor is at its lowest level before it becomes this path, this trajectory that's now harder to control. But in the conversations that my husband and I have had, it's a lot of the lost art of garrison leadership, right? There's command leadership, there's combat leadership, and then there's garrison leadership, and losing sight that it's not often like, oh, this person is just, they're a bad person, they're not going to be a good leader, or they're not going to be a good person for this role. They usually don't have the skills, and they haven't been taught the skills. They've maybe been provided the education, but how's that skill being applied, right? That one dose of sitting in a classroom is not going to help them put that into action and actually have it be a tool that they can pull into their tool belt and use. So I think there needs to be more education on, and more skill development on the differences between leading, coaching, and mentoring, because they're different, and you use those in different areas. Just because you've been assigned a role in a certain position doesn't mean that you have the skills to fulfill all three of those areas. You need to be effective in all three of those areas in order to know your soldiers, in order to really prevent and diminish risk factors.
It just made me think of something else too. When we're talking about suicide, you really have to know your audience, right? The conversation I would have with my peers with regards to suicide would not be the same kind of language I would utilize with some of the soldiers. Just to give you an example, we have soldiers walking on this installation that do not understand what the definition of a suicide attempt is, and may have actually had a suicide attempt themselves in the past. But they actually don't comprehend that. So just being mindful of your audience, right? So that you do tailor that conversation to that particular individual.
Let's move to the second question. So what are some specific ways that ACE, suicide prevention training, can be improved or enhanced? And so not just talking about like the training itself, but like we've got a variety of perspectives represented here. So if ACE is our ace in the hole, so to speak, right? How can each of us, as people who represent different entities or organizations within the Army, come alongside ACE to help strengthen it, support it, enhance it? That's part of the question as well. It's not just, hey, how can we fix ACE, but how can we enhance it, how can we complement it, and how can we support it?
I think for me, it is, and I know that at 1AD, they are working on this, they have been working on this, but like Mark mentioned in the first topic, in the first question about that escort piece, actually I think he was talking about it, that escort piece, there are so many resources that it can become very overwhelming and hard to keep track of, and phone numbers change, and people change, resources change addresses. So having a cleaner, clearer way of communicating resources, their capabilities, and how to access those resources can help minimize the mental work and mental load that someone has to do when they're teaching the class and they're getting asked questions about resources, but also those individuals who are in not be a suicide attempt. Maybe it is a resource like finance that they can help this individual before it does turn into an overwhelming situation. Because the Army has so many resources and so many of them are just amazing, and that can become overwhelming and actually reduce how people are accessing or whether they're accessing those resources effectively.
And to further enhance, like when we're doing the trainings, if you haven't noticed, there's a lot of posters, there's a lot of cards, there's a lot of banners at gyms that have QR codes on them. And it's that accessibility. Do we know what they are, or are we waiting for a crisis to happen and then we're accessing? Do you know, again, like Ashley said, do you know where your resources are? So, if you were to walk up to one of these posters, take out your phone, and take a picture of it, you're gonna find the 1AD resource guide. And there is 1,001 resources in there. And there's no harm, and every time I do a training, I always ask people, I say download it. Just download it, take a picture, and if you need something, then you call a number. And it doesn't have to be a crisis. Everybody waits for the crisis. It's being able, that self-accountability and being able to identify that there is a problem starting to surface and going after those resources. So we really try to get after that in our marketing. So you'll see every quarter we change a different thing we're trying to get after. So the training, unfortunately, is the training, and you can't really deviate from it, maybe in a couple of vignettes, but the support agencies beside it, and having the chaplain there or somebody in the back that can immediately respond if you get triggered by the conversation itself, it is immense. But resources, and I'll reiterate what Ashley just said, it's about accessibility. It's there, you just gotta find it. And look for those QR codes. Take a picture, it's there.
And to add on that, to piggyback on that, I want to remind everybody that when you call 1-800-273-TALK, you're not talking to somebody in Pakistan on the other side of the US. You're talking to the crisis unit here with Emergency Health Network. There's a local mental health authority that serves Las Cruces and the El Paso. So you're talking to somebody here off of Montana 1600. So you, like the chief said, don't wait until you're in crisis. You don't have to be suicidal. You just call that number and they'll talk to you, and it really does help. They really care. I work with them before.
I think, so the times that I have taught ACE, you know, especially as we're talking about the multidimensional aspects of suicidal, you know, risk factors and protective factors, you know, and I just wrote context, 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 you know. Know your audience, know the people that you're talking to, and that takes a lot of work prior to that moment that you're actually up there giving the instructions. Yeah, just, you know, for me, as I utilize the ACE resource, knowing who I'm talking to, knowing their background, maybe some of their personal struggles, maybe the unit morale, maybe the patterns in certain people's lives, all of those kind of all those things should be taken into consideration. And what else? I was going to say one more thing. Partnerships. And so I'm doing more and more where when I'm asked to now facilitate an ACE training, I will reach out to other chaplains or other organizations, partnerships, so that not that it's going to relieve me of the main instructing, but it allows me, enables me to speak to the domain that I might have a louder voice in. And so maybe that's a great approach. You know, I'm glad this is the model that we're using, and you've gotten different people here. But we're seeking to tackle a common problem, right? So just kind of utilizing the different agencies and resources at the same training, and then maybe having this individual, this organization teach the teach one portion and then a chaplain comes and teaches the other portion. That way you get different vantage points. Let's do something.
That's great.
I think one of the biggest challenges that Fort Bliss faces is that there's a lot of units, like 11th ADA up until recently, you all didn't have a BHO that was organic to your brigade. That is huge. We have to take that into consideration because once you have an organic BHO to your brigade, they should be able to identify, right, what are the trends that are unique to not just your brigade as a whole, but each battalion. And trust me, each battalion has their own problems or developmental needs, right? Whether it's leadership, whether it's communication, whether it's boredom. Boredom is a big contributing factor to suicidal ideations, right? Maybe you joined the military and you thought your MOS told you you were gonna do this and now you're doing completely different tasks. I'm giving you real life examples because as a provider, these are the things that I hear. And these things, right, that maybe to some of us are relevant very much so to some of these soldiers. So being mindful of that, the other thing I can tell you that I see is that there's been this big push by the Army to essentially place NCOs in these positions where they have to teach ACE. And I want to first acknowledge it's not a comfortable topic to teach. You're gonna have a tough audience no matter what, right? And this is not something that, you know, unless you're a BH tech or somebody who has a background in this particular domain, it's scary. And it's scary, and sometimes because it's scary, we may just kind of push through, right? Again, that checking the box. I have to remind you, if we don't believe, again, this is not a perfect tool or resource, but if we don't believe in it, how do you expect the audience that is sitting there to believe in this product? Honestly. Right? If I sat here today and I did not really elaborate on any of these things, would you believe me? Probably not, right? So this is the reality that we're working with.
If we needed police, EMS, or fire, what number do we call? Who's unaware of 988? What is 988? That is a crisis hotline. Came out July of last year, and it's been very effective. So, you don't have to go out and text, talk, and all this stuff. Call 988 and push that out, because the more resources we have at the onset of a crisis, we're good. But 988, and give it to your soldiers, please.
And when you call 988, you are given two options. It is Spanish or a military service member. So those are the two options that you're going to get. So knowing that even within this population, you will get to talk to individuals who are aware of and trained and more apt to work with the service member population as well.
That's a great resource.
Go back and answer that question a little bit. How many people here think ACE works? What is the number one cause of suicide? What is it? No,
Alcohol.
it's relationship loss. Isolation is what you do after you can't trust anybody anymore because of relationship loss. And I throw that in there because I think that when we're asking this question right here, how can we improve it? We have to acknowledge that ACE is not suicide prevention. ACE is suicide intervention training. And I think that's what's gotta be the start point, is we've been calling this prevention. ACE suicide prevention training, when it should be called suicide intervention training, because it blocks us from doing the things that really qualify as prevention. Because I hear my peers here talk about these things, and we've all talked about just interventions. But what are we doing to actually prevent suicide? Becomes the question I wanted to ask. And I have my own opinion, but I'm gonna leave that to to throw show when I'm doing this is, how many of you have ever seen the skit Stop That? Lady goes to see a counselor, and he says, oh, this counseling will take about 3 minutes. And he says, really? If you haven't seen it, it's absolutely hilarious. I think our leaders need to stop telling our soldiers, well, just stop doing it. Stop feeling suicide. Stop making those choices. And acknowledge that that's never worked. It creates distance. Doesn't solve anything. Because the other part of ACE is we do ask and escort real aware, but care, our ability to care. Where would you rate the Army's ability to care on a scale of 0 to 10? 2? All right. I'm gonna turn back over to, am I going to take my seat or? Sure, yeah. Sorry, I'm late.
Any thoughts? All right, well, let's bounce to the next question. How can NCOs and command teams at the company level be better equipped for suicide prevention and intervention?
I'm gonna be completely transparent. So the Department of Behavioral Health, our current installation director, chief, every year, establishes and invites command teams and senior leaders to what's called open house. We strongly encourage command teams and senior leaders to come to the EBH clinics or the multi-D clinics to get to know the staff, to get to know, to do a Q&A, to ask questions as to what the BH process is, how can my soldiers access resources, information on, profiles, etc. The reality is, what do you think the turnout rate is? We do not have a good turnout. So that is another missed opportunity. Again, not saying it's, the answer or solution to any of this. However, that's the person that you all look up to, right? That should know all of these things, right? Like where I can go to access services. If they don't have a thorough understanding, then this is where we start to see a lot of hiccups, right? This is where we start to see soldiers being taken maybe to the field when maybe we made the recommendation that they should stay back. We start to see these just missed opportunities.
And I think that's where the so I do a thing called the top 3 grant. So I go into the brigade footprint and I brief the top 3 battalions from an ASAP standpoint. So we're talking suicide prevention, risk reduction, drug and alcohol, whatnot, and the conversation pieces. And it's interesting you say that because it's people's perceptions though. So I had an EBH officer, and I'll give you an example. I said, look, I dug up all the SIRs, and you had 154 suicide ideations in 13 months. What's going on? Well, Mark, 15% of those will make your hair stand up on the back of your neck because these guys are legitimate, morbid, I'm ready to do this. As to where the other 130, which was the 85%, wanted to talk about their chain of command. So when I'm briefing this, and a lot of times it's relationships, right? We gotta get better at these. And the perceptions is, well, Mark, I can tell you in this quarter, look, my spike went up because we were going to the field. We were going to NTC and whatnot. But that conversation has gotta get better with the commands and all the resources. And we slowly but surely are getting there to address some of the things that are going on. But I totally agree with you. It's the field, but again, then it's the command team's perception. Well, Mark Mancini doesn't want to go to the field, so he's just going to say, I'm going to kill myself, or I'm thinking about killing myself. And then that perception of, now if you think about that, 130 that come in, a majority of them don't want to talk about the ideation itself. But the stressors that are causing, it's my NCO support channel, the chain of command, the relationship aspect. But again, are we utilizing our resources prior to help kind of mitigate our own stressors and how we take on stress? Or are we just running to the EBH saying, I feel like I'm going to kill myself because I want to talk to her, and a lot of times that's what's happening. And it ties up the system. So now the 24 that really need the help are backlogged in the system and they can't appropriately get to them because the perception is there's a lack of care and a lack of staff in order to perform these functions. So it's a vicious cycle, but we're getting better, with self-accountability and taking care of each other. And he used the word care. I always say compassion. It's about compassion. It's about understanding other people's plight. And on that, I apologize, but I don't want to get crushed by some lieutenant general.
Appreciate you very much. Thank you. Any other thoughts on this?
So, in H2F, for, different domains, we have the injury, domain, physical domain. In the injury domain, we see a lot of the same spikes as, the field approaches, FTX's approaches, or ACFT, or whatever, those spikes, we see them, and we probably correlate them with what Mark was talking about. The issue with that is, in my eyes, in Miguel's vision, is identifying the problem as they happen. You have to be in tune with yourself, and it's not easy to do that, no question about it, alright? But when you're able to do that, as you identify an issue, see someone, say something, talk to someone. If you don't feel comfortable with talking to someone within your team, come seek us out. We know how to get to the resources. We have Ms. Levitt. She's part of the mental health aspect, or pillar. She knows how to get to the heart of the problem. We've got Chaplain Cole. We know how to get you there, or get you the help. Seek us out. That way, it doesn't balloon, or it doesn't snowball in front of you all of a sudden as you go into the field. You could be a key element to the mission, and all of a sudden you're that single point of failure, and that's an additional stressor on you, and that just snowballs the situation. Let us know what's going on, because if you come up to us and say, hey, my ankle's hurting, I can't walk right, a week before the field or days before the field, but this happened 3 months ago, we cannot replicate the injury or what happened. So all of a sudden you're going to the field, and then this thing kind of snowballs more and more. So you have to be self-aware. You have to be able to identify these situations. And again, you don't always know that. So somehow, some way, you've got to work and ask questions on how to get there.
I would say 2 quick things. One, communication. So we've been talking a lot about care, and that perception that people care, or having that sense of purpose, or some of those risk factors that nobody cares, I'm a liability to other people, I'm isolated. I think what I see from newer NCOs, or even mid-level NCOs, is not asking questions. I get to sit in meetings at division, I get to do squad level trainings and everything in between. And a lot of times I hear really, really great ideas. I hear a lot of energy and effort that command teams and staffs are putting into different initiatives, or even where they didn't have control over an issue, but what they're trying to mitigate it, and that doesn't work its way down. And that tends to leave soldiers feeling like nobody cares, and who are they passing blame on? Where if some of those more junior and mid-level leaders would ask, like when they're told, like, hey, we gotta shift to this, we have to do this person can't go to this thing anymore, if they were willing to ask why, right? Or if they were willing to ask for rationale, then that purpose, that understanding, just those relationships from top down within ranks would be stronger, because otherwise we make up our own stories as to why we didn't get selected for something, or the training calendar had to shift. And usually those stories do not put relationships and other people in a very positive light. So I think being willing to ask questions, and then just making sure that you're picking the right people for the right position. If you need someone to be certified in ACE or ACE-SI or MRT or any of the other trainings, that you're not just sending the person that's free or that wants to go, but you're sending the person that's going to be a good fit for
is going to sound a little cheesy. Do not underestimate the difference that you can make. You don't have to be an NCO, you don't have to be a commander to make a difference in someone else's life. Because you should have that established rapport, right, with your battle buddy. A simple conversation can mean, you know, the biggest difference between actually acting or engaging in preparatory behaviors when it comes to suicide. Something as simple as, good morning, how's your day today? Would that not cheer you up? Hey, you know, your uniform's looking like good today. Like, would that not boost your like self-esteem? It sounds cheesy, right? And you can come up with the own little sayings utilizing your own terminology, but don't underestimate the difference that you can have on somebody else's life.
I actually agree with that process. Don't underestimate the difference that you can have on somebody else's life. Because who wakes up in the morning and goes, how can I mess somebody over today? Anybody? I got one. No bets, sorry. I'm kidding. But I throw that out there, right? Because nobody really does that. What happens is, you have to start, but I would even go to the next level and ask this. Because here's my thing. I think if you're gonna get at the heart of what we're asking you to do, we are your suicide intervention specialists, I think, sitting right here in this panel. We are not the people at the gate doing the prevention. And that is the truth. You know, in my personal opinion, the E5 and the E6 and the squads and platoons are the suicide prevention. But it goes back to compassion, care, whatever you want to label that C as, coffee, you know, whatever it is, right, for you, 8 in ACE, right? I promise you this, so I had the opportunity to be in Okinawa, Japan with the ADA community and with the whole island. I was the senior army chaplain for Okinawa, and it had the highest suicide rate per soldier, capita soldier. We only had 2,000 soldiers. The rest of them were Marines, and we can't help crowds, right? But we had the highest rate, and what we did is we instituted something called adventure therapy into the PT routine. We armed E5s and E6s with the idea that you could do one thing a week, PT-wise, because realistically, to pass this test reasonably, 70, 80%, if you want to go to 90 to 100% on this new ACFT, 1.5 hours of PT in the morning ain't gonna make it, right? But notice that what is the level of the ACFT I need to get to? But then one day a week, each company did squad level PT, and they did things like go cycling, 20-mile bike rides. You're like, what, 20-mile bike rides? Yeah. When you're on an island and you're touring cane fields and beautiful ocean, that helps in the morning. And then you'd stop somewhere for breakfast on the ride, right? We had diving every Wednesday. We called it Dive Wednesday. They would go out and they would literally leave the place and run to a restaurant. Like, hey, we're gonna go for a run today, and when we get there, we're gonna socialize, eat, and then we're going to attempt to run back and not vomit. Right? People became creative. You know what? We're gonna go to this place and we're just gonna hike today, leisurely through the jungle. But giving that freedom is, what does that do? Well, I wouldn't say that. Is the consequences? You have to talk to each other. You're not gonna sit there while you're putting your dive kit together. When you go to the thing, you have something to look forward to. Unlike most peak mornings of PT. What do you know, PT is good, don't get me wrong. I like PT. But at the same time, it's like, if I know I'm running to the best pancake place on the island, I'm gonna put some effort into getting there. I don't know about how my effort's gonna be on the way back, but it makes great stories later in that day. Did you see what's his name vomit on the way back? Yeah, he ate those green pancakes and it really looked pretty ugly coming out, right? The stories like that are what helps bond connection, right? Because the question she said was, say nice things, but I'm gonna argue, why don't we say nice things? And I would argue it's because we don't have, there's a gap in the ability to connect with each other that hasn't been built or reduced. And so I would challenge units to go and do something I call Adventure PT. Come up with your own program. Call it Sergeant Time PT. I don't care. But do something that's meaningful and equitable to that small group that builds the team through the PT process. Because as Sergeant Major Barcina told me when we were doing the Battle of Okinawa tour, he says, Chaplain, so what I get from you is make it suck and they'll become friends. I was like, that's not necessarily what I'm trying to say, Sergeant Major, but yes. Shared suck, shared opportunity to share stuff together, shared events create community, and in creating community we're able to be kinder, feel safer, feel connected. So when a relationship disconnects, such as a girlfriend, family crisis connects, you feel like you can go to the issue. I think that's where prevention starts. ACE is just an intervention. The things that we've been talking about is intervention. So my question is, how do we arm you guys to do the same thing? And to be honest with you, that was my example. We had the suicide rate drop. We have the assessments to prove it from that time period. And then COVID hit and everything went to garbage. But we have the assessments to prove that that worked. So that's my thought.
So those green pancakes were matcha pancakes, but I was, it got me thinking about communication, and so I was at MEOP yesterday providing a group session for some of the soldiers there. By the way, they were all NCOs and above, officers, company commanders, related to this question. And one of them, I asked them the question, so what's one thing that that's been value added during your time throughout these 6 to 8 sessions? And I didn't expect this, but one of the leaders there actually said, I've actually learned throughout these past 6 weeks how to communicate, how to convey what I'm feeling, what I'm going through. And naturally you need to be aware, right? There needs to be a recognition of what you're going through. So in other words, he was working through that piece. But I thought that was profound because I was thinking one of the ways that I would really, one of the things maybe I would implement is something as simple yet necessary as interpersonal skills training, right? Let's be honest, like a lot of leaders, all of us, many of us included, we have a hard time, being aware of what we're actually feeling in the moment and actually verbalizing that, right? Let me just give you a very practical example that I went through even maybe 8 months ago. I was playing Super Smash Brothers on Nintendo Switch with my kids, and I was rocking them, right? And when it comes to games, I get really, really competitive, right? Chaplain kind of goes out the window. Well, no, it doesn't. But after a few rounds, guess who won? I won, right? I beat my wife, I beat my kids, I beat my dogs, right? I victory, right? And so I'm feeling kind of good, I'm feeling kind of boastful, but I'm a humble guy. So I don't say anything, I just have a smirk on my face. And I think to myself, you guys can't beat me. But my son, who is he's 8 now, he's very competitive like Dad. And you know what he does? He throws a tantrum because he's pissed, he's frustrated, he's angry. And he starts wailing, and he accidentally kicks me really hard. And I get pissed off. And I snap, I kirk out on my son, and I'm making it room friendly, but I paraphrasing, I said, who do you think you are? Who taught you to act like this? Who do you think you are touching me? And I get in his face. And my temper's flaring, and I stop in the moment, and I realize, what am I doing? And I quickly exit, and I have to go take a shower anyway, so I just go to my room. And before I did that, my wife kind of said, things got out of hand, didn't it? I'm like, whatever, and I'm thinking in my mind, whose team are you on? Like, did you see what he did to me? How dare you? We're supposed to be in this together, we're teammates. But I come out of that shower after thinking quite a bit. And for me, I began to recognize why that triggered me. And that triggered me because many years of my life, right, there's been a lot of trauma, a lot of hurt and pain in there, but the fact that my son kicked me made me go into a defensive mode. Something as simple as that. And so being bullied a lot, getting into a lot of fights, when somebody gets physically touchy with me and it's an aggressive form, I realize, like, I get defensive, and I'm gonna usually fight back. I'm not gonna run, right? That's just kind of my default setting. But I also realized that some of the false beliefs that I had about me as a dad in that moment, right? I begin to be overrun with those feelings like, man, I'm not a good dad because I can't even control the situation. I let things get out of hand. Maybe I should have let them win. And so all these thoughts about my failure as a dad began to overrun me. And all of that, some of that was manifested in the way that I responded, right? If I was really aware of some of those things, I certainly could have slowed down that process. And I could have sat there with my son and said, hey, Noah, I'm feeling really upset right now. And I think I know why. I don't know if you'll understand, but can I do my best to try to explain why I think your actions are inappropriate and why I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling right now, right? Now, you have to be age appropriate, but that's kind of what I'm getting at in terms of the challenges of simply being aware of where we are in the moment and being able to convey some of those things. Because I think, all of us included, but especially our leaders, we really struggle to communicate, to understand, to be aware, to recognize what it is that we are trying to, what we're feeling and what we're trying to communicate. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Sorry, that one.
No, you're good. Appreciate that. Great response. Let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and start the final topic. All right? Take 5 minutes.